Hello everyone, today I would like to introduce you all to the Suite for Viola and Orchestra by Vaughan Williams, arranged for viola and piano. This piece was composed in 1933 and was completed in 1934. Composers in the 20th century became increasingly more interested in composing pieces for solo viola. To better understand this increase in popularity of the solo viola genre, it is important to first understand why composers were previously more interested in composing for the violin and the cello. The viola that I am playing today is different from the violas of the 18th and the 19th centuries. The predecessor to the modern viola was called the tenor viola. The typical length of a tenor viola was 50 centimeters, and some information suggests they could occasionally be even longer than this. In contrast, mid viola is 41 centimeters. Here I will show you a picture comparing those instruments. Here you see a tenor viola with a modern-day violin. In the next picture, you will see a modern violin with a modern viola. The uniquely large dimensions of the tenor viola stem from the goals of the craftsmen who built them. This instrument was created by people who likely made many more violins than tenor violas, and as such were interested in constructing an instrument that would complement the string family. They aimed for the tenor viola to have a darker sound and slightly lower pitch range. By the early 18th century, there was a greater variety of viola sizes. Some were very playable, but there was no standard size or shape. While the pitch range of the violin allowed its smaller dimensions to produce a commanding sound, the pitch range and timbre of the tenor viola did not produce as big a sound after decreasing the size to make it more playable. The only way for the lower-pitched viola to be heard well by the audience members was for the body of the instrument to be significantly longer than that of the violin. The addition to the length of the instrument, the tenor viola also had a short neck, which made it more awkward to play. However, given the large dimensions of the instrument, it was more technically challenging to navigate than the tenor viola's smaller cousin, the violin. As a result, the nature of the instrument discouraged the composers from writing more extensively for the viola. The viola was treated as an inner voice instrument that could effectively add color to a string ensemble, but not command the same melodic material reserved for the violin. The development into a cycle, composers wrote lines for the viola to harmonically support the cello or the violin, which further solidified the viola's reputation as an inner voice instrument. There were very few violists who played only viola. Many were violinists who also played viola, and as such, they incorporated many techniques that were characteristic to the violin, such as fingering systems and using angled bow hair as opposed to flat, often making the viola difficult to project. Since there were so few viola teachers who were aware of differences in techniques, there were very few viola soloists. Over time, many teachers became more aware of the differences in fingering and bowing technique required for the instrument. One of the pioneers in viola technique and teaching was Lionel Curtis. Mr. Curtis grew up studying the violin until he attended the Royal Academy of Music in London, where he taught himself the viola, as there was no viola instructor. Mr. Curtis became one of the most well-known masters of viola in his time, and eventually became a highly regarded professor, the first professor of viola at the Royal Academy of Music, where he continued to improve viola technique. He commissioned many British composers to write pieces for the viola. Many of them were inspired by Mr. Curtis' playing. One of these composers was Ralph Vaughan Williams, whose viola suites were representative of Mr. Curtis' efforts. This piece was written between 1933 and 1934 and was dedicated to Mr. Curtis and was premiered by him in 1934 at the Queen's Hall in London. Ralph Vaughan Williams was the most well-known composer in England in the 20th century. He was a major influence on English nationalistic music. Vaughan Williams' music is in the folk song idiom. He did a great deal of research on British folk tunes and often incorporated his own version of folk tunes in his compositions. Although his own repertoire does not include a vast array of them, this suite for viola is a perfect example of his folk song idiom. Each of the movements are reminiscent of popular English dances, and because of this, Vaughan Williams refers to the entire piece as a suite rather than a concerto. Vaughan Williams captures the feeling of each of the programmatic movements without losing the essence of English folk song. Vaughan Williams' viola suite contains 8 movements in total, and can be described as a series of musical vignettes. The movements are organized into 3 groups. The first group contains the movements Prelude, Carol, and Christmas Dance. And the second group contains Ballade and Moto Perpetuo. The third group contains Musette, Polka, Melancholic, and Galop. Vaughan Williams' viola suite contains 8 movements in total, and can be described as a series of musical vignettes. The movements are organized into 3 groups. The first group's movements are connected by the Christmas theme. The movements in Group 2 share the common tonality of C. Lastly, what unifies the movements in Group 3 is the fact that each movement contains a dance title, while each dance contains variations of its traditional form, such as in tempo and character. The opening prelude is in C major. The form of this movement is related to the sonata form. Typically, sonata form contains 3 main sections: an exposition, a development, and a recapitulation. It is also reminiscent of a Baroque prelude, particularly those of Johann Sebastian Bach. The viola arpeggiates over a moving bass line that keeps rising until it peaks, and the piano takes over while the viola sings above it. At times, it almost sounds like an expressive warm-up. The prelude is loosely connected to the rest of the suite. Most of the musical material in this prelude is similarly made up of arpeggiated 16th notes, sounding somewhat improvisational on top of sustained counterlines and pedal tones. The opening is particularly evocative of the prelude from Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C major, BWV 846. First, we will listen to Bach's Prelude, and then you will hear Vaughan Williams' Prelude. However, the piece is non-traditional at times. The prelude contains a 7th key change to A major and a metric change to 9/8 in the solo viola line. The character changes. A new dance-like rhythm appears with the directive polka animato. Here is a selection from the prelude. The second movement is the carol, a simple lyrical tune. The movement evokes a peaceful atmosphere of people singing together with the ones they love on Christmas Eve. The carol is the most moving movement in the suite. The movement is generally soft, so much so that the loudest section begins at mezzo piano and then falls back down to pianissimo. The piece changes between 4-beat and 5-beat measures. In the 5-beat measures, there is a half note ending with a short lift before the pickup that begins the next 4-beat measure, similar to how a singer takes a breath while singing a long line. Here is the beginning of this movement. In the third movement, the Christmas dance, the spirit of Christmas celebration continues to the end of Group 1. Thus, the dance in the title refers to this particular movement's spirit rather than its form. Christmas dance gives me images of a fun Christmas party full of music and singing. Christmas dance is in 3-part ternary form, meaning it consists of 3 parts. The character of the dance is brought out in the use of simple rhythmic patterns. The strong 3/4 and 6/8 meters alternates through the whole movement, becoming the central driving force. The open sounds of fourths, fifths, double, triple, and quadruple stop in the solo viola and the dance title marking Allegro pesante creates a dance which is both lively and also heavy. Sometimes, both piano and viola share a metric change between 3/4 to 6/8. At other times, the viola remains in 3/4 while piano changes to 6/8. This creates a hemiola, which is when 2 groups of 3 beats switch to 3 groups of 2 beats, giving the illusion of changing between duple and triple meter. Here are the first 2 phrases from the very beginning. That concludes the movements in Group 1. Now we will move over to the movements of Group 2. The second group begins with the 4th movement titled Ballade. It is a quiet and introspective movement, and is also the longest of all of them. The name Ballade is reflected by its narrative quality. The ballade begins quietly and calmly before becoming more folksy and upbeat. It then quickly goes into a more somber mood with the viola's quasi-cadenzas. The pentatonic scale is used to give this movement a more folk-like tone. A pentatonic scale contains 5 notes in each octave. For example, the pentatonic scale in this piece is C, D, E, G, A. The harmonic contains some mild dissonance, such as that in opening chorus, before the viola starts with a beautiful melody entirely in the pentatonic scale. Here is the beginning of Ballade. piece's use of changing meters continues in this movement. The most obvious example is the switch from 3/4 to 6/8 at the third theme, which I will call theme C. Theme C is the only melody not introduced by the viola. Instead, it is introduced by the piano while the viola plays a pedal note. The piano presentation of theme C complements the pastoral spirit of this melody. I will play theme C in example 7. The fifth movement of the suite is Moto Perpetuo, a fast virtuosic piece that never stops as it swells and falls with continuous 16th notes. The movement is in 3/8 and is marked as allegro. What sets Moto Perpetuo apart from the previous movements are the dissonant harmonies. The movement frequently makes use of minor second, giving it an ominous quality. Due to frequent register changes, this movement can be somewhat awkward for the viola. For example, the introduction shows off almost the entire range of the instrument. It is easily the most virtuosic movement of the suite. In the first 15 measures, the viola begins in its lowest octave and then rises 2 more by the end of measure 6. It stays here and then falls into the lowest octave again in measure 14. This feature is unusual for viola pieces. Here are the first 15 measures. That concludes the movements in Group 2. Now we will move over to the movements of Group 3. The third group begins with the sixth movement titled Musette. It is slow, muted, and conveys feelings of inner peace. Its simple melody is not a far cry from that in the first group's carol. The musette is an instrument similar to the oboe or the bagpipes. The movement is titled musette due to its soft sound accompanied by a drone and rhythmic ostinato, which is meant to sound similar to the instrument. This is particularly clear in the opening. The musette is also similar to the carol in character and tempo. Both begin in the same key and shift to a minor key in the middle. Both movements are also in duple meter. Musette even has a melody that comes from carol. Here is the musette's melody versus carol's melody. The seventh movement is polka melancholic. This movement has a grotesque feeling. It makes me imagine a group of ghosts dancing around a campfire. The polka is a folk dance that originated in Bohemia, which is modern-day Czech Republic. In the mid-19th century, that consists mainly of two dancers, a man and a woman dancing. Vaughan Williams added the word melancholic to the title. In this case, melancholic refers to the mood of a character represented by the viola. It is sad, sentimental, and self-indulgent. Here, we will listen to the beginning of polka melancholic. Williams' polka melancholic is not a traditional polka. The tempo molto moderato is too slow for a polka, as the speed mark is a quarter note equal to 72. Usually, a polka is allegro with the quarter note above 110 to 132 beats per minute. This movement's rhythm contains a lot of syncopation, as well as triple beat divisions on top of duple. The solo viola part is quite emotional in the viola cadenza. The cadenza recalls similar lines from Vaughan Williams' The Lark Ascending for violin and orchestra. This again exemplifies the work's melancholic feeling. First, you will see a selection from Vaughan Williams' The Lark Ascending. Then you will hear a different selection, this time from his viola suite's Polka Melancholic. The final movement of the suite is the gallop, a dance that is known for its leaps and fast tempo. The gallop, named after the running of a fast horse, is a lively country dance that predates the polka. Gallop was introduced in the late 1820s and was popular in Vienna, Berlin, and London. The gallop is the most humorous movement in the suite, which is evident in its thematic character. The opening theme in A major is full of silly rhythms. As the movement is titled Gallop, images of running horses come to the listener when hearing this movement. The movement later gains a buoyant and playful feeling with a meter change from 2/4 to 6/8. Here are these two selections. The entire suite is unified by its melodic, rhythmic, and structural treatment in each movement. All of the movements together create an overarching structure. This whole movement is not heavy like a concerto, and each movement could be performed separately. Not many performers play all 8 movements as a whole. More often, individual suites or sometimes just a few movements are performed on recitals. I enjoy performing Vaughan Williams' suite for viola and piano because I found the quick changes in between the 8 movements to be thrilling and exciting. Each movement is short, and the different characters in each movement give me a lot of room for expression. Thank you for your time today and for listening to my essence about Vaughan Williams' suite for viola and piano.